There we go. Now we got stuff happening. If everything is up and in order. Yeah, so hello everyone and welcome to another Friday stream at Strange Loop Games. My name is Jens, working here as the lead game designer. And the topic of today, or the topic of I think this week in terms of a lot of general anticipation news and speculation, has been our 1.0 roadmap. And yeah, I think we kind of want to break through it a little bit to kind of go over and see there we go. So there's, you know, there's yeah, road the trip with me. There's a lot of anticipation and a lot of comments and feedback, and you know, it's looking like a crazy level of commitment to it and all the features and everything in it and so on and so forth. But I will agree with you in terms of like it's a lot of things in there. But I also think that there's a lot of it that are basically super essential, and there are a lot of things in the upcoming updates that we have that is super impactful in terms of actual game content, as a very, very, very large part of 10.0 has been underlying architectural improvements. So just while 10.0 still had a huge amount of things that content-wise, and I do apologize for any potential cat noises you hear, because I sealed off a piece in the corner of the room where the fiber device is, for the outgoing cable connection, and yeah, one of the cats really liked that corner, but he got himself embedded in the cables, which felt kind of risky. So, you know, it's a new learning day for him of not being able to do that. Yeah, you lock the space from the cat, you will suffer the cat's wrath. But yeah, so on the roadmap, I think we can just kind of go over the blog. And holy crap, he's really diving into that box there. I just kind of wanted to skim over it a little bit tonight and kind of give a bit of feedback from our side of what we kind of how big some of these things are in scope, and also kind of the priority. And like I said, a lot of it and almost all of it on the roadmap is huge content things that are directly gameplay affecting or gameplay changing in terms of like things like maintenance and so on and so forth. So I think we can just give me a second here to pop up over to pop that up there. Let's see, share that, and off we go. So just on the offset, you know, whoa, 1.0, crazy, right? Plan to the madness, I guess. It's been a long time coming, and it's something that we've been really anticipating for, but we also feel like there's enough things to warrant it in terms of being an enclosed loop. Because we do want to make sure that once we hit 1.0, we have that we want to have sort of a contained game loop of all the critical parts that would make up Eco in terms of base game. And on this roadmap is basically the things that are left to do to hit that. Now we have a huge list of other things that we'd like to get in, and different stretch goals in the updates that we have planned, with things like newspaper and you know, like messaging and all kinds of other kind of bits and pieces that could fit in kind of anywhere. But with the big ones on this roadmap being kind of the milestones we want to hit before 1.0 release and really, you know, get that out of the door. And as directly out of the thing, you've got bugs and performance being a very, very big piece of the puzzle in terms of making this a lot more optimized. Our team is working really hard and streamlining a lot of the objects, making sure that everything has LODs. The LODs are looking nice, they fit, they work. Streamline more with textures and making sure that we don't have, you know, duplicate stuff as we're cleaning up a lot of the objects that have been added over time. So keeping everything kind of fresh, polished, nice looking, but still keeping it on a really solid, even quality base. So that we'll see more throughout. We got some of the objects and upgrades that are coming in 10.3. We see these continually being added along the way as well, with all the new work tables having this new system and optimization features. And to that end as well, if you have dev tier and you're poking around develop, I put a bit of a notice the other day about in the backers channel for the develop branch at the moment has a new Unity build on it, so we have a big Unity major version upgrade on the way as well. When that will hit, not entirely sure. It could be 10.3, it could be a bit later, but we are upgrading from 2022 to 2023 Unity, and that comes in with a whole boatload of new ways to kind of improve optimization, as well as a lot better analyzing tools to be able to better kind of direct our efforts in terms of what, you know, where things gets more, where we can improve efficiency and kind of everything around that. So there's a lot of things in there. We also have access to some of the other systems that we want to convert into, which is like the interaction system, or the new input system that Unity has for dealing with different key maps and then controller support and everything that we're looking into as well. So there's a lot of like technical stuff going on throughout this as well. Well, we kind of have access to it in 2022. It's just like it's just available to us, and we don't have to redo things. But yeah, so that's probably more likely going to be something that we look into now that 2023 is probably going to be the last major Unity update until 1.0. So there's a lot of new cool things in there that we can really take advantage of and dive into. But yeah, so on actual game content, because that's why everyone is here. We just love new things. Old things being improved, new things coming. More professions, one of them being the blacksmith profession that's coming in with 10.2. I'm also looking at chemistry and some of the other things that are related to the other subject here that's coming afterwards. So there's a few new professions that we're eyeballing. You have, of course, ranching for animal husbandry for the 1.0 release. We might be able to slip in something in between there, but we are also, along this update, just looking at fleshing out and making sure that we're filling in the content for a lot of the intermediary professions. As there are a couple that have been pointed out, like, hey, we're only doing things in tier 1, and then it's a day 1 profession, and then nothing really happens, nothing really upgrades with it. I don't have a need for new housing, I don't have a need for new workstations or crafting tables and so on and so forth. So that's also high on priority, to make sure that each of the profession is also fairly bulky in terms of time you can spend on it, which is a bit of a detriment to people that like to do a larger variety of things, like grabbing 8 different professions and doing all the things in all 8, which is possible at the moment because there's a lot of professions that are very bare bones, things like fertilizer, paper milling, oil drilling, that just doesn't really have a huge swath of things to revolve themselves around, or not a lot of different variations of buying power things. So that's a big subject on the board. Star spending. Star spending is an interesting subject, and I think a lot of people have a lot of different ideas and anticipation about how this will come to be. We'll broaden this a bit later on, but we're looking at things like scalable profession costs, perks having actual costs to them, and not just be, hey, you get this for free once you get enough XP. And then also doing a bit of split in terms of what you get on the different perks, and yes, logging will get its fixed things. That is coming, so hold on to your horses, hats, and whatnot. So yeah, we are looking at making sure that the talents are kind of not this cookie cutter plate of all crafting professions have the same talents, because they don't have an interactability the way mining or logging has. So they're definitely going to get some love in terms of pathing, and we're looking at potentially branching different crafting recipes to be related to the perks and or specific resource types that gets reduction. So you could have things like smelting, where you could be focusing onto iron, or you could be reducing gold and copper and so on and so forth. So that's something that's applicable across the board in different ways that I'm looking at. So there's a few things in there that is just gonna scale up the amount of stars you need to spend. With that, we're also gonna be looking at things like XP rates. You're gonna get more stars to account for this. And we're also going to be looking at more customizability from the server config side of things, just to make it more easier to kind of fit what you're looking for in terms of your community or your server. That it's just more customizability in terms of kind of dealing with vertical scalability and so on. And then we have, I think maintenance is going to be astronomical in terms of potential impact. It's an answer to the question on Alpenglow. Yeah, so would the perks be at the expense of other recipes? Cheaper iron means more expensive copper and gold and so on. Yeah, so there's a lot of leeway in terms of what we can do. We can increase cost, we can reduce cost, and kind of shuffle things around, which would mean, you know, you could have four people doing the same profession in the same town, but they might have access to completely different things across the board. So that would open up a lot of the, hey, I'm the carpenter, I do everything. But be more of a style of, I am a specialized carpenter in dealing with these things versus my neighbor, which is dealing in that things. In which case, you're still competing for the same raw ingredients, but you're having a different output marketability, because different people might be requiring different things from within the same profession. Or it can be outright, I just make this a heck of a lot cheaper, so I'll make more of these because that's my main income. So that's kind of how we intend to tackle a bit on longevity in player count growth, I guess, because that is one of the big parts of a big part of the kind of loss in player, or the reduction in player retention tends to be towards, hey, this place already has a carpenter, so, you know, I'm just gonna hop in on another server because I feel like I don't have a place here. So like as industry, I specialize in industrial generators and get less materials and so on. Yeah, sort of something in that line. There's a lot of leeway in terms of what we can do. And we might have specific recipes that are just outright locked in terms of end output recipes. So you might have like, you know, a skid steer versus excavator, or generators versus none, and we might just have resource cost reductions versus resource cost increase and so on. So it's still very much up on the shopping block in terms of what we decide to kind of cut out and use. But it feels like it's important to kind of get these things out there because, you know, you guys are super passionate about it, and I see a lot of feedback on, hey, you know, why is this crazy thing not being used, or this is completely underutilized and I have no purpose in life when I'm using this profession and so on. So a lot of that will hopefully mitigate it. But once again, you know, it's not going to be one thing solves everything wrong with this particular piece of the puzzle. It's going to be a lot of small pieces coming in different updates that hopefully brings it all together into a wholesome experience. And that's kind of the big goal of the last bit in terms of the 1.0 roadmap. Just making sure that we can shore up all the parts that are either inconsistent, missing, or has been on kind of the back burner for a long time while we've been working on all of these other aspects. Will the level 6 perk be active for lumber again? Not for 10.2, but it is definitely coming in with a bigger kind of perk shuffle around. Yeah, so maintenance, and I think this is something that a large part of the community has been asking for. We've seen a couple of really cool mods that have been poking their noses into it, and it is something that we have been wanting to do for a long time. It's one of those things where it's fairly smooth to get in, but it's a complex web of things once you start looking at how is this affecting individual pieces, individual professions, as well as kind of getting to a point where you need to have, and this is probably why it's been kind of omitted for such a long time, you need to have enough of a quality of life and enough content in the general gameplay loop to make sure that maintenance doesn't feel like a chore, or you have enough things to keep you occupied so you are less likely to be frustrated from it, and just kind of fits in naturally with just another thing you do in the day. Versus if if you're just having this one thing to do and your workbench continuously breaks and you have no kind of improvement surrounding you, your energy kind of gets focused on this negative thing that is going on, which would be maintenance costing you money because things are breaking. And this is something that will be at the moment on the experimental branch that we have for it, if anyone's been poking at it. It is only affecting world objects that has it enabled, but it will be affecting all world objects. Crafting tables in particular, where you would have a consumable item on the object itself. Something we talked about internally was whether or not we wanted maintenance to be like, hey, is the work table going to break down? Is it going to go from, have a durability on the work table go from 100 to 0, and then once it's broken, do you need to replace it? But then you get into complications of, what if they have a ton of work orders for it? You don't want to be replacing work tables because people have storage links and set up, how they want it in their house and how materials gets deposited and eaten. You can have a bunch of work orders on it that has a bunch of labor into it. So would you lose the labor? How do you deal with work? How do you deal with the maintenance and replacing of it? Do we want to have, like a repair wrench that people need to go around with and hit on the objects to kind of repair them back up to it? And so there's a lot of things in there where, how much of this do we want to bring into game space? And how much do we want to kind of make it fit in with how we're approaching general usability of objects and craftables and everything else? So there's been a lot of kind of back and forth discussions, how we want to do it and how we want to treat it. And there is kind of a difference between like static things like work tables versus dynamic things like furniture and in particular vehicles. So there had to be a distinction in between how do you deal with a vehicle breaking down versus how do you want a furniture to break down? Do you need to jumble around and kind of scour your house for that one broken chair and so on? So that's still something that we're looking at in terms of how we want to, what degree of micromanagement are you going to be influenced by going around and kind of dealing with these things? For work tables, it's fairly straight on because you are always interacting with them. There is a parts component to it, and then you just slot in and have like a repair kit or basically like a tool kit or a utility kit for that specific work table that will allow it to be running. When it's running, it'll degrade it. Once it's out, it'll break and it'll stop crafting. Any thoughts on how it affects more casual players compared to high playtime people? Well, since a lot of it is going to be based over time, in terms of housing, both of them are going to be affected equally. As for craft tables and vehicles, it's going to be on use scenario. So if you're a high active player, you're making 40,000 blocks versus a casual player who pops in makes like 200. You're going to have a significant difference in terms of how much maintenance you're going to be needing to be applying to it. Yeah, my server made a maintenance mod. I'm curious to see how it compares with the official. It's probably gonna be fairly similar in a lot of ways, I think. Yeah, because it's basically what it is. But for vehicles, it'll be a bit different because we can have specific slots for it, and we can have specific effects for these slots. So you can have things like wheels on it, and it'll reduce the movement speed as it gets worse. We can have an engine slot for the vehicles that have combustion engines and like steam engines and so on, where you have a worse fuel efficiency or increasing pollution and so on. And yeah, Zach, which is a good point, which is something that we are looking at. So one of the things related to maintenance is, of course, when things break. So for vehicles, it's kind of if you have a broken engine, you can't move your truck. Is it gonna be an absolute nightmare to kind of grab that engine, haul back, and you're gonna find a mechanic and you're gonna see if he can, replace it, repair it, and whatnot? Or do we just wanna kind of massively reduce the efficiency of that vehicle, or create some sort of kind of penalty for omitting it? And oil spills is something that we are looking at in terms of pollutant for it. So looking at something like it creates an oil spill, it acts on a separate layer, and then it works similar to basically ground pollution, but it would be something that doesn't mitigate by itself. It stays and it spreads, and you have to have that player interactability for cleaning it up, which would mean people might be wanting to do loss and rewards penalty for causing these things, as well as helping mitigate them. So there, we'll break through the maintenance thing in a future proper kind of video on that whole system on its own, because it's going to be it's a lot of things in there. And we are also obviously looking at things like block maintenance and how that could be done and how that could be interactable. Would it be possible to contain possible oil spills with payments and so on? Yeah, so like a lot of that is something that we're still actively looking at. So I'm not gonna get too crazily detailed in it, because things change, things get poking around, and it'll be on its own kind of dedicated thing. But at least that gives you kind of an idea on where we're at headspace wise for these things. And yeah, all of it is obviously gonna be kind of gradable in terms of how bad is the maintenance gonna be costing you, and so on and so forth. Do you think mannequins for showing off clothes could be a thing? We do have mannequins in terms of assets. They just haven't been tuned up with the new avatar system properly, and to be able to kind of slot clothing and so on. So there's a backside to it. It'll probably make it in eventually, but when it will, don't really have a specific update for you on that. Will clothing degrade and need maintenance? Yeah, so that's like anything that we want to have that applied to, we can. So clothing, and kind of basically anything. So there's a lot of areas and applicants for what is going to be subject to it. There might also be a discrepancy of like, hey, what maintenance 1.0 might be releasing, and we might do a portion of it and then do another update to kind of increase and expand on it later down the year. Is there a chance of more earlier cosmetic clothing? It's kind of a bummer the good ones are so late. I think Art Team, if they could get away with it, they would just do clothing, because some of the guys in there just loves doing that stuff. So are we gonna see more? Probably. If and when that happens, I don't really have an answer for you. Any thoughts on having an electrical to mechanical power converter? Mechanical power has no green solution other than windmills and water wheels. Lots of thoughts, but quite the opposite. So while not mentioned in the roadmap, one of the things that I'm looking at in terms of the module upgrade is doing things like upgrading, using module upgrades changes out the behavior of the workbench. So you would have something that initially requires mechanical power can be upgraded to be using electrical power instead. So you would increase and scale up and differentiate requirements of the work tables as you upgrade them and goes along. And that was also, in terms of maintenance, that was also kind of something that we were talking about, whether or not we wanted upgrades to be related to maintenance, and if we wanted them to also decay. At the moment, we opted not to, because it has such a profound economical impact in terms of if a module stops working, then suddenly you're crafting things at twice the cost, and being able to calculate that on the fly if you're offline or not really paying attention to it, then you could suddenly be crafting things and selling them way cheaper than you can afford because you forgot that the module ran out and so on. So that's something that we wanted to avoid, just out of player sanity, basically. So speaking of upgrades, I bet you didn't miss this one. Obviously, top and bottom. Yeah. Dynamite and explosives. Crazy, right? False. Yeah, couldn't you add an option to the work table to make it stop working if the module is broken, unplugged? Yeah, but if like the notion there is basically, if it stops working because the upgrade module ran out, then what's the difference between an upgrade module and general like maintenance parts? You kind of removed the reason to have parts, or it's just another piece of parts basically inside, which then just kind of caused for confusion. The modules are also the modules are also supposed to be permanently attached to the work tables and so on. So yeah, explosives, dynamite, fun stuff. Dynamite, coal, sulfur, clay. More uses for clay. Not necessarily, but you know, can always chuck in a recipe with clay if you want it. No, so and this is a topic that just recently, as of like an hour ago, popped in on I think Dev Hangout, where people asking for better ways to mine, process, and kind of get around the mining stages, especially the mid game or early transition into mid game over to late game, because right now you basically have pickaxe and then you have skid steer and nothing in between. And this is something that I think everyone has been frustrated with for a long time. And we've done some big changes to our AoE system and the tools, the tool usability for area of effects and how that's calculated and everything. So part of that was done in anticipation for being able to more widely use spatial application support. But yeah, so how is this going to work? Why is this going to work? And what on earth are we planning to do on it? So just make sure the dynamite correctly checks if it can break blocks based on loss and land ownership. Oh yeah, that thing's already that thing already kind of works. So the way because it's using the AoE system, which we refactored and upgraded thanks to Casper, it already does that. It behaves in a way where it checks internally with the atomic actions system. So it already checks for if it's property access, if there's a district, if there's laws on it, prevent it if there is, and so on and so forth. It checks the individual tiles that you're accessing. So, you know, if it's a 5x5, or 5x5x5, it'll check the whole cube and each tiles inside that cube and only do the things to the tiles it's allowed to do. Similar to if you grab like a modern hoe and just do the 5 tiles straight in front, or 3 tiles, I can't remember what we set it as. It'll do like the first ones but stop you at the third one. So yeah, what is this going to be doing to? Well, it's going to change out 2 prospects entirely. One, as charcoal was mentioned as well in that whole discussion earlier, it'll be something that you are going to be using charcoal rather than coal, which is going to be the base principle differential between regular stone coal and charcoal. However, you are also looking at another critical component. People have been pointing out, hey, fertilizer. Crazy. Yeah, so there's a mix match in between. So you're going to be using fertilizer, obviously, because it's a great source of, well, critical component in any type of detonatable material. So fertilizer is going to be a big part of this. And I'm also looking at chemistry, as I mentioned initially here, as a potential future profession as well. Because what I want to introduce is more of a, and this is also boiling into some of the later things with oil processing and upgrades. I want to introduce more on the chemical field, which we don't really have anything at all in Eco, to kind of tie in with the more advanced systems, scientifically speaking. Yeah, the word is nitro. But yeah, so fertilizer will be able to do things like parts of explosives, which will significantly bump up the usability for fertilizer. If it's going to transform into a separate thing, and like fertilizer gets renamed and we're using that as a base for chemistry and whatnot, that's still to be decided. Yeah, go alchemy first and then chemistry as the second, like, later tier upgrade. No, but we want to introduce stuff like sulfur as a resource as well. And the new alchemist profession can go pretty crazy on it. But yeah, so fertilizer being a critical component. We've got charcoal that is underused in some fields. It was mentioned in a voice chat I was in a while ago with a big discrepancy between if you're using mainly coal versus charcoal tends to be depending on the map generation, because if you have a ton of trees nearby but very poor landscape for coal extraction, like the wetlands is across the world away and no one really bothers with it, or it's often a distant thing, it's more likely to be using charcoal for some of it, if not all of it, depending on the logger activity. But we wanted to make sure that charcoal kind of has its own thing rather than just being kind of a replacement intermediary for steel. Issue with charcoal is that you spend so much fuel just making it, while wood is also needed for the construction. Yeah. The crafting timers on it and the fuel consumption for it kind of got massively bumped, or like the crafting time got massively reduced, which makes it a lot more doable. In some of the recent updates, we've also reduced the cost for it significantly. There is a new dense charcoal recipe coming in 10.2, which is a hewn log version of charcoal. So there's some further resource reduction that you can do if you do both hewn logs into charcoal. And then obviously, you know, we're looking at things like paper involvement. We're looking at, as I mentioned, sulfur. So we can do things like sulfur as a byproduct for the oil manufacturing and the oil refining. As well as some of the other kind of things where bituminous coal, or the stone coal, which is what we have in as regular like coal in the game, has processing variations to split apart the pyrite and sulfur production that allows you to gain potentially as a new ground material. So there's quite a bit there. Yeah, and then obviously, as Satsuki points out on Twitch here, being able to do things like gain lime from different types of bone sources and or like shellfish and sea resources. Catcall, yeah. And also doing, like, as I mentioned, synthetic fertilizer, so you're getting away a bit from that organic requirement, but still have it in more advanced machinery. So we're looking at what type of workstations can that be done in, how crazy are we going to do with oil drilling and change that out as reprocessing in terms of catalyst usage, and like I said, you know, kind of digging into the more chemistry and chemical side of things. That has a lot of the components for some of the more advanced alloy making and surrounding systems. So there's a lot of very impactful gameplay stuff in there that we can use. Just from the offset of like, hey, we want to add dynamite. Dynamite goes boom, and then, you know, kind of shuffle things around. How is this going to be applicable in game? Or we want to do it as a tool and then you just shove a dynamite and then it blows up, or do we want it to be sequential? You want to be able to do multiples, and yeah, so, you know, a ton of things in there that we want to go through and kind of make sure that we get right. One of the things that in particular I'm looking at is shuffling around how, as this, like, the big part of this is to help mining get into a more evolved state of, you get away from the pickaxe. The pickaxe is still usable if you want to be precise and kind of pick specific pieces, or you want to do specific shapes and whatnot. But in terms of bulk harvesting, as well as kind of changing out the way, shape, or form this happens in, is and this is going to go absolutely freaking crazy with a lot of people, is also adding a scoop front loader attachment to the steam tractor as well. You can be precise with the skid steer. Yeah, so dynamite, and I'll go over this on a more specialized stream for this as well, is going to be not generating rubble. At the moment, at least, the plan is. So you are going to be turning it into crushed material on the offset, but the assembly is going to be done by mining, so you're not going to lose the mining requirement for turning it into rubble, or turning it into from rubble into crushed. However, you are going to lose the ability to use these materials for certain other things, like statues and ashlar later and so on. But you're not gonna have, you place down and blow up a whole series of a mountainside and suddenly you just fly rubble all over the place. But it is gonna be converting it into crushed material and then kind of sliding down, falling down, and then you have the ability to use the steam tractor in mining operations as well, which adds a layer of infrastructure requirement and more planning in mining. But I think it'll be an interesting change of pace. But it's still, you can still just chop away with a pickaxe and just hand pick everything if that's, if you really want to keep doing that. But it's there's some ingenuity there, and Domer, yeah, essentially, part of it is to that, and it gives you that ability to just go absolutely crazy, but it will come with side effects that you might not be anticipating for, or you might not see coming, as we have a few surprises kind of tinkered in with that system in mind. That's still being kind of worked on, so we're not entirely ready to kind of go over that. Will we get earrings if we stay in a cave when it blows up? Probably not, out of an accessibility thing. Avoiding tinnitus and like general ear damage. I think the ear ringing effects movies can be quite disruptive as is, and yeah, total calorie reduction if you stand next to it. So there, it's gonna be pretty cool, and I'm really looking forward to start working on it. I'm doing the planning right now and kind of laying out the groundwork for what it's gonna be encompassing and the general design for it in terms of gameplay aspects and everything. So if you have some concerns or whatnot, hit me up, because I am laying down the foundations for what will be what this will mean in terms of implementation. Kind of got stuck there. I want dynamite. I want dynamite probably as much as everyone else that wants to see things blowing up in eco. It'll be fun. I'm looking forward to it. Hope everyone else is as well. So off that, we've got ecosystem impact. Alpine, yeah, so a lot of that is still something that we're looking at and leaning towards more of like early ones being like hit the fuse and then shove it on a wall or something, and then it's a time delay and it goes boom, and then potentially having the late ones doing remote detonation. So we'll see what we do. It also, we're kind of bouncing in between art and seeing what we want to, kind of how far we want to get it, because we also want it to be like Binary pointed out in the chat earlier, it needs to be better than what you currently have. Having dynamite would then be able to make fireworks, make culture things for settlements. Definitely not outside the realm of possibilities. On Angel, is it realistic to realize this in 8 months? New version of Unity, migrations, fixing bugs in settlement systems, and so on and so forth. Absolutely, I think it is. Because the systems are split up in very different parts of the gameplay, as well as very different distinctive parts in who on the team is working on what. So for things like the backend things, like the Unity upgrade and very unhappy cat, So with the backend tech stuff and with the Unity upgrade and a lot of the migrations and whatnot, as well as the performance optimizations, it is something that Casper and Mike, as well as Grigori, is working on. And Mike, being our CTO, is kind of broad spectrum in that. Grigori almost dedicatedly works only on back-end tech systems, versus Gabriel, for example, who's been working on the Exhaustion system, is working only on like front-end, what the user is kind of poking at. So there's a very distinctive difference in terms of the team expertise for the different subjects. And a lot of this is just front-end gameplay things and content, so a lot of it is on not super technical, but just general content addition, which we have more leeway with to be able to work on code-wise. Will laws have interesting interactions for allowing Dynamite to, say, destroy specific types, but not other types? It's definitely doable. It would be falling under the same thing as like when you're actually mining and pickaxing. Like you can set a law to only allow to mine sandstone but not granite, and so on and so forth. Skids shouldn't be able to mine rock, and instead the excavator should have a rock drill on it to turn rock into rubble. No, my excavator, my poor excavator. But if we sounds like an exploit. Well, it really varies. Like you can kind of already do this in a lot of things. In a lot of systems, like you can prevent killing one animal but not the other. You can just shoot away and not have to worry about it. Or if you're mining with a pickaxe, you can if you don't want to be accidentally mining this material, you can just set up a local law for it. However, that also requires its own set of infrastructure, and is everyone going to be happy with it? Is the laws going to be able to be passed, and so on and so forth? So I think there's a lot of things in there that is definitely going to be subject for manipulation from the player side, but that manipulation also needs to be completely agreed upon by the community that are affecting by it. So yeah, there's some things in there. As for the skid steer thing that you're going on there, it was actually a big thing in kind of the whole how steam tractor scoop versus skid steer, kind of why use a skid steer if the steam tractor is going to be able to do the same thing. Hence why the steam tractor is not going to be able to actually mine. It's only going to be able to dig, which means you're not going to be able to break rocks with it. You can pick up rubble, but you can't actually break rocks. While the skid steer, being the direct upgrade, gives you that ability. However, you might still want to be using dynamite because that removes the need to crush it. And it also makes it fall down, so you can do like a wider walls and things around that. But I digress. Ecosystem impact. So that's another pillar in eco that we feel that is really needing a bit of a bump now that a large part of the civic stuff is done. And this thing kind of comes into two pieces. One being an upgrade to oil processing. I'm not sure if it was mentioned here. Oh. A chunk of it is to oil upgrade. And we're looking at how we want to deal with pipes, pipelines, and potential oil transports, and so on and so forth. Also dealing with partially into maintenance and vehicles, but also finally looking at will mining 6 perks stay as is? Probably. But we are looking at that, you have to spend stars on it, so it's not going to be completely free of charge in terms of specializing for it. Are there any plans to make open pit mining more attractive to increase the impact of mining on the landscape and ecology? At the moment, most mining is done completely underground and has very little effect on the terrain. Yeah, so not entirely sure that would make it within 1.0. But we are like ground stability and like ground support basically is things that would be interesting to investigate and look into. However, I don't think that we will have enough time to really delve into it enough, as well as making sure that it's optimized enough to not absolutely cause mayhem. But doing things like some sort of integral like structural support and effect would really be something that we'd like to do. But it's, you know, it's on that stretch board charter of, if we have time, maybe we'll look into it, but we're not going to plan for it because it's unlikely to happen. But for this explicit ecosystem and pollutions, we're looking at oil spills in terms of badly maintained objects that require and use oil. You've got garbage and recycling that we're looking at. So crafting will generally always generate garbage of some type. It might be very pollutant garbage. It might be just, you know, wood scraps that you can recycle, reuse, burn, or whatever you feel like. Garbage from research, like White Tiger. Garbage from generally... there we go, sorry. Phone was going off in the background. Yeah, so recyclability from materials and things just generally producing more garbage and scraps of different types, and that will be needing to be recycled, refined, processed to reduce their environmental impact. Save the planet, eat the wrapper. I'm not sure if that's a healthy advice. I think we want to avoid eating the wrapper, in particular if it's plastic. But yeah, so things like increasing longevity of foods and so on. What should happen though if you don't have enough inventory space to store the packaging? Oh god. Crazy spiral there. Error, no space, can't eat it. But another big thing about pollution or pollutants in general is something that I've been wanting to look into as well, and that is carbs, vitamins, fats, proteins, and plastic. Perfect balance. Yeah, you gotta wrap those carbs and vitamins. But now something that I'm kind of leaning in towards looking at, and that is having variable pollution sources caused by the actual fuel type used. So different types of fuels would be generating different pollutants depending on the intensity and the machinery and so on. So you would have things like charcoal burns less pollutants than regular coal, or gasoline burning more CO2 than biodiesel and so on. So you would have an actual environmental effect by choosing fuel types, and also expanding on the general oil processing and making that a bit more dirty than it is. Because something that we really want to go for is making pollution a thing, in terms of like pollution is intended to be kind of an unavoidable thing. Right now you can kind of do whatever you want a bit as long as you keep within the reins, and then you just stop doing things and pollution just dissipates and runs off. So that whole system is going to be looked at in terms of permanent ability and just having the cleanup be more of an activity rather than just passively wait. And he's very, very unhappy in that corner. So and in in that, there's a lot of things that we can look into and have plans for how in depth that's going to be, how much is that going to be impacting, and we also want to make sure that it's customizable enough to make it fit with the server's use as well. Regardless if it's a small community server or if it's a huge public server. So there's a lot of things in there that we've been kind of eyeballing and wanting to take a bigger kind of hit on. The microplastics, lead, and asbestos. All the good stuff everyone needs. And then we have kind of challenges beyond the meteor is definitely something that we're looking at. Be it either by different types of scenarios or challenges, more endgame type disasters like the meteor. And we'll kind of be drafting a few ideas and post them, and then let people kind of get involved and get a bit more of a player input on kind of what we want to focus on for those. Potholes on bad roads. But yeah, things like earthquakes, ideas that's been bounced around with things like wildfires and so on, but wildfires are really, really kind of unpredictable, very RNG based, and it would always, destroy someone's house rather than someone else's, and then that person is going to be very sad because rival's house got burnt to the ground, and then suddenly I have sole proprietary monopoly on this material. I just got here. What did I miss? Summarize it in 3 words. Yeah, volcanoes are also localized. Volcanoes are something that we're definitely looking at as a viable thing, because we have a whole biome that's basically untapped. Crop disease, animal husbandry, and so on. Yeah, so general pollution buildup by things like microplastics and kind of unavoidable disasters that you're causing while advancing through the tech ages, as well as spending time on server doing things, is really what a lot of the improvements towards the pollution aspect of the game and the ecosystem, having that as a priority. And kind of looking forward to breaking this down with everyone and just going over each of these as we advance through the updates of this year. And it's going to be it is going to be packed, and it's going to be an absolute roller coaster back and forth with things. Yeah, dynamite. Everyone loves explosives, right? But yeah, so pollution and its impact and sourcing is really something that belongs in terms of the 1.0 release build up, and something that we kind of really want to break into. And then we also have accessibility learning curve. We want to kind of improve on the tutorial, make it a lot more wholesome, make it a lot more I'd almost want to say linear in terms of kind of guiding you through what you want to be opting for building early on. Like, we have a couple of vague suggestions in there, but it's nothing really that's like, hey, build this to be able to do that. It's basically build a house and have a workplace, and then bam, you're left to your own devices regardless of what you do. So we want to be looking at that aspect a bit. We also want to be we are also looking at a new starter block material, which is adobe. It's been teased about a bit. It's currently targeted for 10.3, not making any promises, but it will bump hewn logs and mortared stone will be directly skill locked by masonry and logging. So it's not going to be a workbench material anymore. Adobe would be your starter thing, which then decouples it from the general economy. We can make it as cheap as possible, and kind of help people get better situated early on in the game, getting some infrastructure up, getting some stores up, and kind of things going up. So there's, you know, there's some parts in there to kind of mitigate the learning curve a little bit and make it easier to kind of get into, but also quicker in a sense, so you can see things. Paint table or paintable? How about both? What if the paint table is paintable? And then of course we have kind of the grand feature of 1.0, which I'm not gonna go in too much here, because one, it's way up at the end of the year, but also we have a lot of things that we need to yeah, your cats are wild. It's the one cat that is going crazy. She's just kind of watching him go nuts, and it's like, what on earth are you doing? But yeah, the animals, the usability, the resourcing from them, the pollutants they generate, byproducts in products like animal feed and so on and so forth, hay, straw, and everything in between, which comes with a lot of things in surrounding it. It also makes, you know, grass being more of an appetizing thing, because you want to be feeding them, you want to be mixing and helping them out, interactability with them, catchability of them, and kind of all of the different aspects for this. So a lot of things on the board for this. This is probably one of the bigger kind of whole encompassing feature, because it contains a myriad of interactions, mechanics, and it's pretty bulky, so it deserves a huge amount of space to kind of go over and break this down into how you're going to be using it, how it's going to be impacting things. That's going to be absolutely fantastic once that's in, and that's going to be our general kind of round off on this. Can animals on a farm also catch diseases like bird flu? It'll probably be something in the ranges of like dealing with health of the animal, with making sure they're fed and so on, and then depending on them, they'll have different growth rates and product rates and so on. Will there be more disaster challenges not caused by player influences? I'm leaning towards a volcano, but you know, let me know what you think, because volcanoes are kind of hard to do anything about. But it might be something that you can protect yourselves against in terms of after effects. I mean, we've seen pretty disastrous results of the active volcanoes in Iceland. And we also saw some pretty crazy results of some of the things in the Pacific that's going on, as well as Hawaii. So we know how destructive these things can be. Lava biome. No, we haven't really talked about a lava biome, but we talked a little bit about general disasters and what we can do for something that isn't a player-induced disaster. Thunderstorms as a natural disaster with Tier 1. Wreak havoc on Tier 1 player structures. Yeah, that falls very heavily into like RNG realm, and you could have someone that is horrendously suffering lightning storm after lightning storm after lightning storm, and then has his house wrecked 3 times a day. And then you have people that just doesn't at all, and then you suddenly have a RNG induced huge benefit of this guy hasn't had his house destroyed, so he has uninterrupted experience the whole day, and so on. Also, oh boy. The freaking cat. I need to videotape this. Record it and just post it or something. I don't know. That cat just excessively digging into it. He wants to get into that corner, but he's not getting into it. He's climbing vertically downwards. Just you know, picture that. No, so we have, you know, and as Angel was saying, you know, it's a huge list of things. A lot of it is very, very content rich, content heavy. You know, in direct player hands. But I'm feeling pretty confident about it. We came out with 10.1, came out pretty fast. 10.2 is almost done. We're wrapping up some final things. The playtest should be out very soon. And on that subject, any chance for animal drawn carts and wagons? It's not improbable, but we'll see how far we take it with as we get closer towards autumn. Socket, yeah, the game severely lacks in punishment for bad behavior like other games. It's advertised as don't pollute your planet while trying to save it, but I rarely see this having any actual impact whatsoever. Yeah, and that's a big part of our goal with some of the content, or you know, a large part of the content that is coming out throughout the year here. Problem is that Meteor isn't really a threat. It mostly gets ignored once you get a solid community. Oh yeah, we have some ideas about what to kind of shuffle around, but there's also a large part of that is also no impact. Sea otter. We have 2 meters of sea level rise and a lot of oil. No, so a large part of why the Meteor, at least in my personal view, isn't seen as much of a threat as it generally is. It's because there's not a lot of depth to the actual resulting, you know, destruction of Meteor. It's basically you build infrastructure, which you're already doing, and then you just expand the amount of power you have available to, and then bam, you just pop down the lasers and click a button and then done. And the Endgame thing is also something that I'm looking at kind of redesigning to be more of a, you need to do it over the span of several days. As we're looking for the oil upgrade and being able to do things like having liquid as a component and a volume resource, rather than just a flow rate control for pumps, which would allow us to do different types of liquids as resource costs, and we could do things like having coolant, and you need to generate enough coolant to be able to pipe through the computer lab and kind of upgrade things, and you need to do enough research and enough calculations to be able to target it and track it and kind of find the places where you need to build these things to cover properly and so on. So there's a lot of crazy things we can do with the late game that I'm looking into. As well as kind of improving on resource types and acquisitions. Like right now it's, you know, you get gold, you get steel, and then bam, you're done. So having a deeper layer of catalyst involvement and byproduct involvement from oil production, as well as late game crafting, gets into being more of a long-term and more sophisticated path of interactions and costs. So yeah, there's a lot of things to open up and kind of deal with things in there that we can definitely look at. Thought about adding survival elements like consuming more calories when in a hot and cold biome. Oh yeah, it's definitely on there on the pile of things, and it's part of kind of what, having clothing as an effect, but it also involves a lot in like general biomes and transitionings, and we also don't want to make it too much of a clothing swapping simulator. Say you're out in a desert and you're mining, and then suddenly, oh, I need some coals, I need to run over to the grassland. Suddenly you need to refit your outfit twice to be able to get back to the desert. And or if you're going up the mountain, you need to switch around back and forth. Is that necessarily a bad thing? It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's the generally the size of the world in where it gets highly dependent. Because if your biomes and the world is too small, then you're having way too many weather types and effects in very close proximity, which means you get, you bump around quite frequently. Where it just kind of gets too overwhelming. As for an overtime thing, it's more inclined towards that area. Like you spend, it's kind of like an acclimatization thing where you have an internal timer of like spending. Let me do like a calculation of like 6-hour time span, and then depending on the proximity, you spent more time in, but then you also get into the realm of what if you spend most time in the desert and then suddenly you're in the grassland for the next hour? Are you gonna needing huge, like undress completely to be able to get there, or not have penalties? So there's a lot of very big variables related to that type of interaction, and it's one of the reasons why we've been kind of hesitant to do that without more thought through process of making sure that it is it needs to add a layer of complexity, it needs to add a layer of sensibility, but at the same time it also needs to be having some type of like interaction value. And so there's a lot to that. Any plans to discourage skill padogas or furniture tombs? Yeah, a lot of the surrounding maintenance stuff is gonna be reducing that, I'm hoping, because you are gonna need to interact with stuff a bit more, which means you're probably not gonna build giant towers of doom with crapped in furniture when you have to go around and actually fetch it or interact with it. You're gonna be more likely to want to have it as an easy access thing. But we're also looking at things like occupancy, space requirements, and so on as well. But yeah, so coming up on almost an hour and a half here. A quick glance on what I was supposed to do early on in this stream, just to kind of get it out of the way. But kind of briefly go over, as the topic mentioned, with Exhaustion. And we talked about Exhaustion in the last stream, about kind of where we're at, what we wanted to do with it. And now, 2 weeks later, we kind of have everything that we wanted to have out of it implemented in the game. There's still a few bits that were missing that I can't show you on. We wanted to get some of the filter stuff on server browser, so you can easily identify exhaustion enabled servers versus non-exhaustion enabled servers, and kind of the settings surrounding it. But popping into Unity, connect to server while, or where did the server go? That is a question. There it is. Haha, here we are. So new settings for exhaustion. Previously this was basically a, hey, exhaustion is enabled, this is how many hours you can play per day, and the quantity of time saved over to the next day if you didn't spend that time. And so we expanded on it with a significant amount of options. So this is still being worked on, so some phrasing might change or some naming might change. But yeah, so you have, this is set up in 3 different categories right now. We might see a 4th and a 5th later on. I'm working on some vehicle stuff at the moment. So you have time designation. And this is a big change from the current working exhaustion. So exhaustion in its current state in release is basing it on refresh rate on server time, or the in-game clock. So it cycles through on the day passing through from day 1 to day 2, day 2 to day 3, and so on. And we're changing this out to be actual local server time, so you can have a definitive set time of the day regardless of the state of the server, to kind of enforce this and make it more predictable for each player to be determined. And this is all shown in the tooltip in game as well. So you have the refresh, you set the hours and minutes for daily playtime. And then you can set up and have this determined on actual local time. So exhaustion is moved into its own complete config. You still have to disable it inside the feature config. So you have the exhaustion time enabled to true or false. If it's enabled, then you have all of the things set up inside the exhaustion config file. And you can enable and set specific quantity of time per day. And a lot of this is a huge thank you for a lot of feedback and a lot of experimentation from Monsoon over on EcoWorld, that have been using exhaustion pretty substantially throughout the last year or 2. Can't even remember how long they've been having exhaustion running. It's been a long time. And then obviously having some extra settings to allow this to be dealt with. Maybe it would be useful for players to know the average weekly playtime of the active demographics, so they can find a server that matches their playtime. That's all. The playtime is available for the server to set somewhere. Can't remember exactly where it is, but it is in here somewhere. Someone might be in here, that someone in the chat probably has an specific topic for it. It's in one of the configs. And the exhaustion is gonna be representing that thing as well. So you can see how much time, if the server has exhaustion enabled, yes or no. If it has it enabled, how much time do you get per day, and so on. And then you can also set the total banked hour, like how much, the hard cap of how many hours a player can save up to. And then we also have something that is another massive thing from that feedback. Yeah, that's the one. Thank you, Spook. The painting stuff is gonna be running into 10.3 likely, because we ran into some general issues with client-side chunk updates that needed some more investigation in terms of syncing and updating the chunk loading to make sure that it actually realized that it had been painted. Yeah, so another kind of critical thing that we really needed to get in here as well is pausing on resting. And pausing and resting is essentially anytime you're sitting on a piece of furniture and or being a passenger or whatever else, it pauses the exhaustion time. So you can sit down and it would just pause it, and you wouldn't have to worry about it if you go AFK or you're just thinking for a bit on what you want to do. Just sit down, relax, and it's not gonna run on your exhaustion time. And then you also have some server specific things for allowing retroactive time, as well as giving you a bonus hour for that initial first login of a player. Use exhaustion to craft faster. But yeah, so one of the things that I wanted to add in here as well is to set, because there's two things missing that we want to get in. One of them is we want to be able to discern all the general interactions. So the server can set what interaction is a viable exhaustion blocked interaction. And I'll show this in the tooltip here in a second. As well as the vehicles to be used. So right now I have it set up with, just expand on this a little bit, and then we just pull up this UI scale just so it's a little bit more readable here, which is crazy quantity. So when you have exhaustion enabled and you are exhausted, you get this huge block of text basically defining what you can do and what you cannot do. And then it also states when you can start working again based on that refresh timer. Now, if you see if I remember, yeah, there we go. So when you have time available to do stuff, it tells you how much time you have remaining. Am I losing frames? Oh, I'm running debug and everything else is going crazy in the background. Don't worry about it. As well as Unity being Unity. And then how much extra time you get on that next refresh. And if you have it set up, and this is still being kind of see if this yeah, so that tooltip is still missing. It's not plugged in yet. I bring a toilet with me everywhere in real life. But it is going to list when you have a differential of daytime, it'll list specifically for that day and how much you gain on those days surrounding it, so you know that, hey, next, as you can see here, next refresh is in 6 hours. If it's variable, giving you that notification. And some of the bits that are missing that I can't really show you yet is tooltips on the clients. Like when you are looking for a new world and you want to grab it, you can grab, we go Tiger for example, you have that active playtime hours. this being reflected in with exhaustion as well, so you can see how much time you get per day, allowing you to kind of look at a server and see, hey, you know, is this going to be fitting me? Does this work for me, or am I better off just looking for another server? So we want to incorporate that into the filters as well when you search for them. Oh yeah, there are some general improvements to that browser thing. Don't have that open. What is going on? I wonder, do we have... I wonder if that was plugged in. Don't need that. Need that. Ooh, I don't want to... Oh yeah, and it's not on. This is not on a branch with that update. I wonder if I can just show that off. I missed the raid alert. Yeah, I completely missed it. Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you for the raid, I think is the term. Nothing. See if the power hammer wants to play nice now. I believe it should. Yeah, the sound should be in there. Head into lurk. Yeah, we're kind of coming up to a close here. Just wanted to see if I haven't heard it, but apparently we're supposed to have audio done for the power hammer, but the power hammer was not set up on Gabriel's branch here, so I'm just having a poke at it. Make no promises of how this is going to be sounding or how crazy this is going to go. Nature's Quotes, if you're still here, I'm not sure I follow it. Not sure if that's if it's a question to add combat or modern hammer. You don't want to play nice? Apparently not. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Will luxury items make it into the game, like fancy cars, luxury yachts, private jets, jewelry, jacuzzis, and whatnot? That's a very, very, very wide list of things. General housing stuff, possibly, probably. I mean, we already have some fountains and whatnot else. Fancy cars? That's a very good question. Maybe it wouldn't hurt with having a more just personal speedy car. I know someone wants a certain flyability vehicle, but that also has its own kind of set of complications and whatnot. I think let's get the a lot of that is basically, we'll see what happens after 1.0, because there's a lot of things we need to get done before that, and there's a crazy amount of technical issues with some of them. Mechanics profession, repairing sports cars, yes. That's a shame. I was hoping to be able to go through and hear that thing make noises, but maybe it can make noises anyway. Skills level up. What was that? Smelting? Smith. Blacksmith. And now we do... I don't think it's making noises. Slash give steel. 10. Oh, I need to have the thing. Is the glasswork silent? I thought it had sound. I thought it did too. Should have sound. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it does. It might be very, very, very low. Yeah, it's very, very low. That's what it is. It's very, very, very faint. But there is a distinct sound to it. But yeah, no, we got a lot of things to do. We're all super stoked about the things that are on the roadmap, and it's a lot of things that we have been wanting to be working on for a while. Speaking of sounds, can we get a sound slider for rain? Yeah, it's some of the configs for audio and the audio channels is in here. You got the weather one. Should be that. But it might even not be fully extendable. I'll talk to Leonard about it and see what we can do. Because I agree, I kind of like the rain to just be very, very, very subtle. Just having like just a hint of basically breaking the silence when music isn't playing and whatnot. Just kind of having that fade thing going on. Yeah, basically. And while, as we see Armored, for example, just once it's freaking pouring down, once just like rainstorm, you really want to feel like this is a horrible weather to be standing in. So a lot of different opinions on it, hence why we want to have some adjustability for it. Yeah, it got tuned out a bit, but you definitely hear it. But yeah, I'll check in with Leonard and see what he says about it. He's our lord and master of sound-related settings. But yeah, no, with Exhaustion kind of thing there, I'm quite happy. And also, and this is something that's might be fairly controversial on the Exhaustion stuff. What vehicles do we want to natively block with Exhaustion, like by default? Because at the moment I'm kind of leaning towards just having the vehicles that actually perform work, as in the general workable vehicles, like the tractor, the skid steer, the plow, like stuff that just helps produce things, be limited, versus vehicles that are just used for basically transportation and transactionability, not being that. as well as kind of how far I want to take the general settings for it. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm leaning towards, and then leaving enough customizability for any server that kind of want to fiddle around and change out what exactly they want to do. And that's and socket, and that's kind of where that's where we want to go with the tweakability of the setting. Right now, interactions are kind of hard. Like exhaustion is kind of hard locked to the direct consumption of calories when used in terms of interactions. So we kind of want to decouple that, but it might not be done for 10.2. It might be something that we just kind of bump in there later on, where allowing servers to completely specify which interactions are exhaust limited, versus which aren't. Because right now it's very much limiting everything that consumes calories when you're doing it. So mining, digging, and everything, including building houses, which is something that is moddable. Like if you remove the calorie cost for placing blocks and picking up blocks with the hammer, it'll avoid the exhaustion. But we want to be able to still have that calorie consumption, but be an interactable decider, because hammer is such a very distinctive server to server basis, because a hammer can be in a lot of cases people just with exhaustion enabled, they don't try to do fancy house buildings or whatnot, because I don't want to spend my exhaustive time on building houses when I can spend it on doing mining, or I can accumulate wealth by interactions. So just nuking it from the hammer completely is kind of hard, because the hammer is also used to build a large volume of the infrastructure which makes you money in the world, mainly road building, because then road builders suddenly don't have to worry about exhaustion, because they can use vehicles to transport their goods, and as long as they just dig away, and terraform prior to the exhaustion running out, they can just build the road afterwards on that thing. So it makes it kind of tricky. Yeah, hammer should be replaced by something else to build roads. Yeah, we have some ideas for that, but that is it's in that stretch gold fantasy land of maybe, perhaps, and if we do manage to do it, we'll reveal it, but it's gonna be it's a touch and go if we can pull it off in time with the rest of the things that we have planned that are gonna be coming in. And Sammy, yeah, so assuming new animals will come with the animal husbandry, like cows, yes. Definitely looking at new animal types. But yeah, I think we'll call it for this stream and this Friday. Went on a lot longer than I had planned, but such a fun crowd to just interact with and answer random questions. Tags in store is still a cryptic thing. I'll update when I know more. Yeah, there's a lot of use for it, and it's something that I'd like to see happen sooner rather than later, but it's also fairly complicated thing to do it. But yeah, we are kind of ending out with like 10.2 is kind of running out at the end of its development cycle here. There's a few bits and pieces left. But yeah, playtests should hopefully start fairly soon. And then if that doesn't reveal any super critical stuff, it shouldn't be too far off. But yeah, keep track on the Discord. We'll post announcements and post news and everything. So yeah, and Armored, hit me up in a DM about the rubble thing, because we got some stuff that is being worked on for it. But yeah, no, everyone, take care, have a great weekend, and I'll catch you on the next stream, which hopefully will be in 2 weeks, with some cool updates and some other stuff. So thank you very much, and take care.